Tesla has completely changed the way that people think about electric vehicles. They're no longer this niche thing that only sort of weirdos and eco-freaks drive. They can be stylish as well. Now, Volkswagen wants to take the next big leap in electric cars, which is not electric vehicles for millionaires, it's electric vehicles for the millions. Volkswagen is the people's car after all, so who better to make an affordable electric car? This is the first one that we're going to be getting here in America. It's called the ID.4. They sell a hatchback version of this car called the ID.3 in Europe, but of course Americans don't buy hatchbacks, so Volkswagen has decided to target the ID.4 right at some of the segment's best sellers like the Toyota RAV4 and the Honda CR-V. Let's see what the 2021 Volkswagen ID.4 is all about. So let's begin with an exterior walk around of the ID.4. That's ID.4. That's going to be the name of all of Volkswagen's electric vehicles moving forward. They're all going to say ID in the front, or hashtag ID.4 as that cute little license plate up front says. Now this is based on the MEB electric architecture, so they can turn this into pretty much any shape they want. They're even maybe going to bring back the Volkswagen Thing as an electric vehicle like this. Now I mentioned the ID.3 in Europe. That's a hatchback model. They've raised it up a little bit to turn it into the ID.4, kept the front styling mostly the same. You have this very friendly, very affectionate front end. It kind of looks like a Disney character to me, very friendly, not really aggressive, but I think it is more stylish looking than a Tesla. We've got this really nice blue color, and we've got a gradient package on this car that gets us a black roof, which is pretty cool. These are LED headlights that come on the Pro S model. The base model does not have these. We do have this really cool light bar that stretches across the front end of the vehicle. We have a first edition, which is already sold out, but we have some unique styling cues. We have this new white Volkswagen logo, and on the Pro S model, this will light up. That's the only thing the ID.4 First edition does not have is a light up Volkswagen logo. So now let's come across to the side where, because we have a first edition, or if you get an ID Pro S, you're going to be getting these 20-inch wheels. That's kind of an interesting option on an EV. Big wheels usually hurt range. 19 inches comes standard on the base model. You get these little flitzers that say first if you get a first edition model. And I mentioned that gradient package with the black roof. We also have this really cool silver bar across the front. That's across the side. That's part of the gradient package. We have these flush door handles. That's for better aerodynamics. This car is very slippery through the air. It has a very low drag coefficient that's going to help you get the best range possible. Now back here we have this really interesting taillight bar, stretches across the car with some very interesting details throughout. I think it's a very cool look. Again, white Volkswagen logo with white ID.4 written right here, letting people know what this vehicle is. No exhaust pipes down here because, again, all electric vehicle. And because we have the first edition model, we have a tiny little tow hitch that you can use to tow about 2,000 pounds. All right, so now it's time to hop inside the ID.4, where just like the exterior, you've got sort of a conventional cabin, but this is very different than what we've seen from any other Volkswagen product in the past, or this is probably the way most Volkswagens are going to be moving forward. And it's interesting because I literally just spent the first part of this week driving a Volkswagen Atlas Cross Sport, and it's funny how many things are similar, but how many things are different. For example, we have this white steering wheel. It's supposed to harken back to sort of the ivory steering wheels you used to get on like a Beetle or a Samba bus. I think it looks fantastic. We also have the white surrounds here. However, I think it's going to get very dirty unless you wash your hands constantly every time you drive your car. Need not worry, because only the first edition model is going to have this white steering wheel. All of the rest of them are going to have a black interior. We also have a gauge pod here that has our speed limits. We have sort of all of our safety functions here, the adaptive cruise control, lane keep assist. It kind of shows up on the screen, so if a car is in front of you, it'll show that. I really like this, and that's a nice addition considering that a lot of Tesla models like the Model Y and the Model 3 don't have anything here, and they make you look over here for your speed. So it is really nice having a speedometer in front of you. And much like a Nissan 370Z, when you move the steering column, the screen comes with the steering wheel, which is really cool. It means that the steering wheel will never be blocking that screen, which is quite nice. So When we come in here, the interior, there's a lot of things that are very futuristic, I think, for futuristic sake. And when an automaker, and Volkswagen is not the only automaker guilty of this, you know, the Mach-E has a very different interior on the Ford side, they're deciding to try and copy Tesla because everybody is obsessed with Tesla, and for good reason. They're pretty good cars. But I think that the automakers are taking the wrong lessons away from Tesla. What do people really like about Tesla? They love the big screen. They love not having to push the start button when they get in. What do people not like about Tesla? Not having any buttons surrounding them. So let's start with that. The steering wheel here has what look like pretty conventional controls. You can tap here to up the volume, but it's not a real button. You can kind of push it here, but the way that you really want to access the volume is by swiping across this. And I just think that's a little bit annoying and also distracting. Now let's talk about the main screen here. Because we have a first edition ID.4, we have the optional of 2 screens. The base models are going to come with a 10-inch screen. This is the larger 12-inch screen. I think it looks great. Look at the graphics on this. It's really nice, really crisp. Looks kind of like an iPhone. So you have your different menu settings here, but if you push this, it'll always take you back to the home menu. But I don't know if you noticed that when I hit that home menu, it didn't go very quickly. Watch that. It's kind of laggy, and I've noticed that this screen can lag quite a bit, actually. So if I come over here into my vehicle settings, that pull up the data, sometimes it's quick and snappy. Other times it can be quite slow and laggy, so I'm not a huge fan of that. There's no volume knob and there's no climate controls dedicated. To raise the volume, you can either tap here to raise it up, tap here to raise it down, or you can slide your finger across it. I think that's a little bit annoying. I would have much preferred to have a volume knob. Ditto for the climate controls. Now you can swipe across them here and you see that'll raise or lower the temperature, or you can push Clima. I don't know why climate couldn't just fit here. Again, this is not a button, this is a touch button, and that'll pull up a menu here, so now you can control the fan speed, stuff like that. I think it's a bit distracting. I would rather just have normal climate controls. Now, while we are on the climate controls, I will mention that there are some cool settings here. You've got this smart climate screen where you can do things like warm hands. So if you just want the vents near your hands to be warm air, but the rest of the cabin to not get too hot, you can do that. I think that's a nifty little feature. But Volkswagen has put in voice commands because, you know, they think, oh, well, you know, if people are not loving these touch, you know, buttons, well, we'll just make everything voice command. Now, there's a problem there as well. You trigger it by saying, hey, ID. And then it pulls it up and you can say, tell me a joke. It's slow. We're waiting.
Sorry. The system could not connect to the internet.
So sometimes you'll get that. Sometimes the system will just be really slow. You can ask it to do things like change the climate, open the sunshade, the massive sunshade. I do really like that. It's a huge piece of glass, and it does have a sunshade to close. That's good in the smoldering heat of Florida. But I've noticed that this system just doesn't seem quite ready for prime time. So for example, if I told it I'm cold, it could raise the temperature, but it's slow and it takes a while to respond. I'm going to try it one more time here. Tell me a joke.
Oh, my developers didn't teach me that, but I'll give it a go anyway. I couldn't work out how to fasten my seatbelt. Then it clicked.
Ha ha ha, good one, Volkswagen. German sense of humor there. So I've noticed that it is quicker when you hit the voice command button instead of using the Hey ID function, because I think the phrase Hey ID is just not very natural to speak. I hope they introduce some way to name the car. It'd be cool if you could say like Hey Jarvis or something like that. Now we do have some drive modes here. I'll talk a little bit more about these out on the road. You can change from Comfort, Eco, Sport, and there's a custom mode as well. We will talk a little bit more about that when we get out on the road. And what's interesting is when you hop in this vehicle, you don't hit a start button. We do have one here on the steering column, but you need not press it. As soon as you sit down and push the brake pedal, it will technically prime the vehicle to go on. And then you have this weird twisty style knob here. You twist it backwards, that'll trigger your backup camera. Twist it forwards to get into drive. Once more to get into your regen braking mode, and then you just click this to go into park. Now you may have seen when I put it in drive, you have this really cool light bar that goes across the screen. They call this the ID light. So when I put it into drive, watch what happens. It goes across the screen, and then when I put it in park, it's going to do it again. Now that can be used for your GPS. So if you have a navigation prompt, it'll kind of swipe to the left or to the right, which is a very cool function. I really do like that as well. Also, while you're charging, that kind of acts as your like charge bar to let you know how full the car is. That's really neat. And we do have some cool ambient lighting here. So you see how the screen is all blue here. If I come onto the ambient screen, we don't just have colors, we have these names. Eternity, which is sort of like this teal color, and it changes the whole screen, which is really neat. It kind of allows you to customize your car to make it more your own. I like the red as well. There's this yellow called Vitality. Doesn't really match with the blue exterior, but if you got white or black, I think that would be cool. There's also a custom function that you can set it. I have it on purple, but you can come over here and basically have all the different colors of the spectrum. I think that's a neat little touch. Now, before we hop into the back seat, I want to just mention, because this car does not have a transmission, because it's obviously all electric, Volkswagen has been freed to do some outstanding interior design here. So we've got two cup holders here. You can stick my large Yeti, will fit in either one of them very easily. But let's just say you don't want cup holders up here because they're a little bit too far. You pinch these, and then this whole cup holder apparatus is removable. Check that out. That's really cool. And then now you just have this huge storage area down here. Ditto for down here. We have two cup holders available. My Yeti will fit in both of them. Now they're a bit big, so this is best for like big cups, but you can take these little dividers out, and if you prefer to have these up here dividing, you can stick these up here. They are movable, so I really like how you can kind of swap and configure these. So now my Yeti can go up here, and if I want, I can take this little piece and I can move it down here. Now I will mention, I think that the ones up here are a little bit more usable because these tend to get blocked by the armrests on the seat if you're using those, but it's still a neat idea. Now we also have two USB-C ports in here, all USB-C ports, no regular USBs on the ID.4, but if you don't want to do that, you can just stick your phone right there for wireless charging. Hop into the back seat, and to do that we're going to rely on a very weird sort of door handle. They've made it flush here for better aerodynamics, but it's pretty easy. There's just a button in there. I think that's a little bit easier to open than, say, a Tesla door handle. And hopping back here, we have about 37.6 inches of rear legroom, which is a little bit less than what you'd get from like a Toyota RAV4 or a Honda CR-V. That's really what Volkswagen has tried to benchmark here. But what I will say is, since there's no transmission, you have a completely flat floor back here, so even the middle seat is going to be extremely comfortable. We have the leatherette seats here on our first edition. Cloth is what comes standard on the ID.4, but we do have rear air vents, two more USB-C ports back here, which is quite nice. The panoramic roof stretches all the way back here. We've got two cup holders here in the center console. They don't do anything tricky like the ones in the front, although there is this weird small middle part here. Maybe that's for a Red Bull can or baby bottle or whatever, but my favorite feature is right here. It's just a little pocket. It's perfect for a cell phone. That's a nice innovation from Volkswagen. Time to talk about trunk space, and we're going to try opening up the tailgate with the little kick sensor here. It works on the first try. I actually found that very easy and very intuitive. You can also close it using this button here. We've got a little over 30 cubic feet of storage, which is sort of comparable to like a subcompact or a compact SUV like a Toyota RAV4 or Honda CR-V. Those vehicles have a little bit more storage space than this. Those are a little bigger though. Now we do have some very flexible storage back here though. So you can lift this up so you can kind of have some underfloor storage, or if you just need something bigger and taller in here, you can take this floor out and slide it down, or you can just remove it completely entirely, and now we have just a lower load floor. Now if I lift up the floor again, we have a little storage compartment down here where I have my charging cable stored, and if I fold down the rear seats, which go 60-40, you'll have about 64 cubic feet of storage. Again, not quite as big as some of its gasoline engine rivals, but I think decent enough for most commuters. So before we get it out on the road, we've got to talk about the obvious weird thing, which is that this car comes with one of these, a charging cable, no more gasoline. Let's go over the ID.4's charging infrastructure. ID.4 can go about 250 miles on a charge in its rear-wheel drive configuration, which is what we have here, and it can charge using both AC and DC fast charging on all trim levels. Now, it's capable of charging on a 125 kilowatt hour charger, that's the DC fast charging, and on that, you'll get from 5% to 80% of a charge charge in just 38 minutes. That's the quickest you can get, and that's on stations from like Electrify America. Volkswagen actually owns its own charging network called Electrify America, and you get access to that for 3 years absolutely free. That is pretty cool. But 80% of EV owners charge at home, and if you were to do that on a level 1 charger, that's the regular outlet that you plug your iPhone into, it's going to be quite slow, only about 3 miles additive range in an hour of charging. Your best bet is going to be getting a 240 volt level 2 charger installed in your garage. That is the same outlet that your washer and dryer run on, and that can charge the ID.4 in about 7.5 to 11.5 hours. So you plug it in overnight, you'll wake up to a full charge. That's what's pretty great. Now, what I've noticed is that the infrastructure is kind of spotty depending on where you live. Near my apartment, I have 2 chargers that are right across the street, but sometimes they're taken, which can be a bit annoying. Then where am I supposed to charge? They're not the DC Electrify America ones. The closest one of those is about 20 miles from my house. So there's still going to be a component of figuring out whether or not the ID.4 works with your lifestyle and figuring out whether or not it's the right vehicle for you. All right, so now it's time to get the most important Volkswagen since the Beetle out on the road and see how the ID.4 drives. Now, we're going to talk about the electric motors that we have. So the early models, including this first edition, are only going to be available one way. That's with a permanent synchronous magnet motor on the rear axle driving the rear wheels. Yes, this is a rear wheel drive vehicle, a lot like a lot of sports cars out there, not front wheel drive like a Golf GTI or a lot of hatchbacks in that case. Now, it produces decent numbers, not overwhelming, 201 horsepower and 229 pound-feet of torque. Now, that's very similar to things like my Mark V Jetta GLI that I owned back in the day. So that's pretty decent power. It's going to get this vehicle up from 0 to 60 in about 7.5 seconds. It's not pin you back in your seat performance. It's definitely not going to make Tesla owners scared of this car in a drag race, but it's electric, so you put your foot down and you go very quickly. There's no gears, there's no engine that needs to rev up, so the response is very immediate. It's very quick. It's pretty fun, but when you reach the end of the pedal and you really floor it, you're going to notice that this is not the quickest vehicle, but I suppose it's about on par with things like a Honda CR-V or a Toyota RAV4, which is really what Volkswagen benchmarked with this car. Now, we do have some drive modes, as I showed you before on this mode button. I really like driving this vehicle in sport mode. It really tunes the throttle very differently. So let's go ahead and put our foot down and let's see the acceleration. It's a quick little car. It definitely surges forward, extremely smooth acceleration, but I like the way the pedal is tuned more in sport mode. It's a little, you have to really push down on the pedal in normal mode, and especially in the eco mode. They do that to help you conserve range. They feel that if consumers, are gonna need to push a lot down on the pedal, they probably won't, and then they'll use less range. You also get much tighter steering here in the sport mode. I really enjoy the steering on this car. It's very natural, almost GTI levels of engagement, I would say, but it is very light in a very German Volkswagen-y type of way, and the handling is actually pretty fantastic, because of the rear-wheel drive and the very low center of gravity that's afforded by having all of the batteries in this car. The 82 kilowatt lithium-ion battery are all in the floor. That means even though this is an SUV with a big piece of glass up here, the weight distribution is very low. Now, don't go for a minute thinking that this is some kind of rear-wheel drive electric GTI. It's definitely not that level of fun. Like, if you floor it, you're not going to get any like tire squeal or anything from the rear-wheel drive aspect of this car. I think the real benefit of rear-wheel drive in this case is that you're not going to have any torque steer, because the front wheels can just do the steering and they don't have to worry about doing all of the driving. And the steering just feels very natural in this case, and the handling is just overall very nice. So I think you're not going to expect sportiness out of this car, but it is quite good. We do have strut suspension in the front and multi-link in the back, giving this car a very compliant ride. I think it is a little bit softer than a Model 3 or a Model Y, which is quite interesting. Now, we have brake regen here, so you can put the car in D, or you can click it again to put it into its B mode. So when I take my foot off the pedal, the car is going to really come to a halt. I've found that if you get good at this, you can almost do your entire commute without touching the brake pedal. When you stop at a light, you're gonna have to put your foot on a brake, but I think that's pretty cool. It'll help you conserve your brakes. Now, what's interesting here on the ID.4 is we have disc brakes in the front, drums in the rear, and that's an interesting choice by Volkswagen there, because in a rear-wheel drive vehicle, you really don't have to rely on the rear brakes much, so drums, do the job just fine, and especially with the regen braking. But discs are expensive. You have to replace them, you have to, do rotors, you have to do pads. Drums last a really long time. Volkswagen says the service interval on those rear brakes are about 100,000 miles. That'll keep you out of the dealership for a little bit longer. So as I mentioned earlier while we were talking about charging, let's focus on what all of this really means for you out in the real world in terms of range. Because Volkswagen and the EPA quote this car at 250 miles of range, which I believe is going to be fine for most people. You really just have to ask yourself, how often am I getting in my car and driving more than 125 miles one way that I can't then get home and charge or find a charger while I'm out? Because I've noticed during the few days that I've spent with this car that public charging is still a bit hit and miss. It really just depends on where you live, where you work, where you're going to be able to charge. It's a personal lifestyle choice that you yourself are going to have to take inventory. Nobody is going to tell you whether or not this EV lifestyle is right for you, so you have to figure that out yourself. The MPGe on this vehicle I think is pretty great. You're going to get about 104 MPGe in the city, 89 in the city, and 97 on the highway. It's a bit hard to kind of translate that into miles per gallon numbers, but what I will say is that this vehicle I think is underestimated. So it's got a 0.28 drag coefficient that's very slippery through the air, and from what I've noticed, that 250 mile range seems to be a bit conservative. I think if you had the AC on low or maybe not on at all and you were driving at a reasonable pace, you could probably go more than 250 miles on a charge. For example, I think they gave me the car with about 185 miles on it. I drove about 20 miles and it only lost about 5 to 10 miles of range. The range seems to kind of fluctuate all over the place. So I think that with a good driver behind the wheel, you could probably do about a little over 250 miles, maybe closer to 300 even. Now here's the interesting thing I want to point out. There is going to be an all-wheel drive version of this car. They're going to add another electric motor on the front axle, making it all-wheel drive. So that model also gets more horsepower. So it goes from 201 horsepower and 229 pound-feet, which is what we have here, to 302 horsepower and 330 pound-feet of torque. That is a huge gain there. That's basically like going from a GTI to a Golf R in terms of performance. Now, I don't have any 0 to 60 numbers for that vehicle because it's not out yet. It'll be available later in 2021, but I am highly intrigued to find out what that vehicle is like to drive. And as soon as Volkswagen has one available, I will get it and I will report back to you on how that vehicle drives, because I think it's only about a $3,600 upgrade. That sounds like a fantastic amount of money. Imagine being able to step up from a GTI to a Golf R for only $3,600 and you're getting all-wheel drive. The only downside on that all-wheel drive model is the range is going to drop, or at least the estimated range, from 250 to 230, but I think I would gladly take that compromise. So let's sum up the driving experience here. I think this is a little bit more fun than something like a RAV4 or a Honda CR-V. I think the Toyota RAV4 Prime might be a little bit better for some buyers right now who just aren't ready to make the full leap to electric cars. Now, Tesla, I think, is much quicker than this car. I think it's definitely, a little bit more fun to drive. But again, the Tesla Model Y is much more expensive significantly than this ID.4. And then Ford also has the Mach-E, which I think is also a little bit more fun and definitely better looking than this car. I haven't driven the Mach-E, but I will very soon. But again, that Mach-E is a lot more expensive. So I think if you're looking at the budget level of EVs, I think this is a more comprehensive and enjoyable experience than something like a Chevy Bolt, something like a Hyundai Ioniq or Hyundai Kona electric. And I think it's something that you should definitely consider if you're in the market for an electric car. starting price for the base ID.4 Pro with rear-wheel drive is $39,995. Now to step up to the Pro S, that's going to get you the leatherette interior, the sunroof, some nicer stuff, the bigger screen, $44,495. Now the first edition model is the one I would recommend you for $43,995 because it gets you everything that you get on the Pro S, plus the gradient package with the black roof and all of that stuff. But the first edition is already sold out, so unfortunately that one is not going to be available to you. Now all of these include a $7,500 federal tax credit from the government, which you have to qualify for, which is really nice. It basically pulls down the price to make it comparable to something like a well-optioned Honda CR-V or Toyota RAV4. Now I think you should wait for the all-wheel drive model with more power. To get that on the base ID.4 Pro is going to be $43,675. A $3,600 and some change upgrade. $3,600 for all-wheel drive I think is great. You get the power increase. For an all-wheel drive Pro S, the most expensive ID.4 you're going to be able to get, $48,175, but again, factor in that tax credit. Now let's factor in how that compares to some of the ID.4's main rivals. Now you could have a Tesla Model Y, which comes with all-wheel drive as standard and a 326-mile range, but the cheapest way you're going to be getting a Model Y right now is just under $49,000, which is about $9,000 more than a base ID.4, and there is no more $7,500 tax credit available on that Tesla. Now Tesla will allow you to off-menu order a base Model Y for $39,990, but that comes with a much lower range that's more comparable to the ID.4 with rear-wheel drive and 244 miles of range. Now the Mustang Mach-E is another interesting option. The base model costs almost $43,000, but its range is a little bit lower at 230 miles. Now Volkswagen says the best way for you to probably buy one of these is going to be to lease it. They're going to be doing a 3-year, 36-month lease. You get 10,000 miles a year for $379 a month with $3,500 due at signing. I think that's going to be your best way to get an ID.4. So that was the Volkswagen ID.4. This is a very interesting car, and I think Volkswagen wasn't joking when they said this is their most important vehicle since the original Beetle launch, and this could lay stake to the company's future here in America, whether Volkswagen is successful or unsuccessful. How is it as their first really mainstream electric car? I think it's a pretty nice effort. I think it drives really well. I think most people are going to enjoy the styling, and the interior, I think as soon as they iron out some of those little tech hiccups, I think it is a really nice car to drive. It's more comfortable than a Tesla. Now, is this going to flock people away from Tesla and steal their sales and crush Tesla to bits? No, I don't think it's going to do that, but I do think it is a little bit nicer than things like a Chevy Bolt and some other affordable EVs we had, and we'll just have to wait and see how this does. But I think if you're in the market for an EV, you absolutely need to put the ID.4 on your shopping list. We hope you've enjoyed this review of the 2021 Volkswagen ID.4. For more videos like it, be sure to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell to be alerted of our latest videos. Now, this is the first electric vehicle we've actually reviewed on the channel, but we will be getting a Mustang Mach-E in for review, so be sure you are subscribed and have the notification bell clicked to be alerted when that video comes out. Now, check us out on all of the other social media platforms, including Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok for more short little videos just like this one. I'll see you next time.